you mentioned the DRC and South Sudan and some of these places. From your vantage point, what are the main drivers that are forcing people out of their homes and into these neighboring countries, these IDP camps, refugee camps?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's going on from sort of the wider view of the region?
Yeah, so northern Uganda, or Uganda in general, has some of the most open refugee policies in the world. They traditionally have been, and whether or not this is more kind of a business model for them, but the reality is nearly 2 million refugees are living in Uganda at this moment, and that number has grown significantly in the last several months. And in South Sudan, I mean, it is one of the youngest country in the world, and continues to have these internal conflicts that directly affect civilians. And so over the last, again, since the beginning of the year, maybe into last year, there's been this resurgence of conflict between the president and then the opposition, militia groups, things like that. And then, as is the case in Africa, compared to other conflict areas around the world and wars happening around the world, civilians are dramatically impacted in Africa compared to other places. Not that it doesn't happen in other places around the world, but certainly in Africa. And so South Sudan, the Ugandan government is involved in trying to keep some stability in that region, but because that conflict kind of erupts and then dies down and erupts and dies down, you have South Sudanese refugees that are coming into northern Uganda, then they're going back, especially now because there's the threat of being impacted by the conflict in their own country. And now they're coming into a place in Uganda where the resources are just depleted completely, and specifically, there's no food available.
Of note, it's interesting that you bring up Uganda having some of the most open refugee policies in the world. I remember during the withdrawal in Afghanistan, the American withdrawal in Afghanistan in 2021, and that massive airlift that was going on to evacuate people. One of the big places those Afghan refugees were being sent was Uganda.
Yep.
And I remember reading that in the headlines going like, wow, Uganda, of all the interesting.
Yeah.
You don't realize where their sort of role is with refugees in the world, if you're not in your line of work, I think.
Yeah.
And so to see that right off, like, wow, they're taking in refugees.
Yeah.
Like, what? Okay.
That's
really interesting.
Yeah. As a side note, last year I was contacted by a family, an Afghani family who had been living in Kampala since they were taken out of Afghanistan in 2021. He was a doctor. His wife had a high-level position in the government before they left. Their kids were well-educated, and they were just looking for work in Uganda, but they were kind of in this limbo because they didn't have formal long-term status there. Obviously, everything with, international politics, geopolitical issues that were happening. But yeah, the reality is Uganda hosts refugees from all over the world. Obviously, especially in northern and western Uganda, the vast majority are from DRC and South Sudan. And those numbers have grown significantly. Close to 170,000 new refugees have come in just this year from those two countries, primarily from eastern DRC. So,
yeah, you spoke a little bit about what's going on in South Sudan. What's going on in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So from what I've been in, what we see in the headlines, what we can find in the headlines, let me say that. And then also, some of the feedback we get from our leadership teams in Uganda. So first of all, DRC is a massive country.
Yeah.
And so the government center is in the western side of the country, and then the eastern slice of the country is really where a lot of this conflict has really escalated over the last couple of years. And in DRC, in Eastern DRC, the M23 militia has been responsible for a lot of the escalating violence there, which has then forced refugee or people to be displaced, many within the country still. And then obviously numbers of 60 to 70,000 have come into Western Uganda as well, to the refugee settlements there. And that situation is complex and complicated. Depending on what you're reading, a lot of people are blaming the Rwandan government for backing the M23, as well as the kind of the peace deals that have been in place between the Congolese government and the M23 militia. That kind of fell apart, especially end of last year going into the beginning of 2025. It's interesting how both in South Sudan and DRC, as well as other places around Africa, the conflicts seem to, and I don't have any clear data reporting on this yet, but we're seeing that a lot of these conflicts are escalating again as more and more international aid is being stripped away. And so there's this convergence of opportunity, maybe is the best way to put it, where we're seeing these, whether it's the president and oppositions in South Sudan going at it, or you're seeing this M23 group gain some greater confidence that they're not going to be held in check anymore. And then you look at these almost, as one report I was reading described it as, internationalized civil wars happening. So you have players from the outside that are connected to these, what seem to be civil wars or tribal wars or whatever the case might be, but they're fueled by international presence or connection of some kind. And then DRC is known for their vast natural resources. And so I think there's a lot of business interests there as well. And so if there's instability, it gives more and more people from the outside, as well as some of these militia groups, the opportunity to come in and take advantage. And then, of course, civilians are the ones that are most affected.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about today, is the civilians, but what's going on geopolitically there? I mean, you brought up M23, and I think we tend to look at these things through it's sort of an American lens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how regional politics are shaping realities for civilians in light of what's going on with, in the case of DRC, M23, but you can look at other militia groups in other countries. Sure. And it's sort of like a two-part question here. When you talk about international interests, you've got China that's very interested in mineral rights throughout Africa.
Sure.
I would say the United States is not interested in mineral rights throughout Africa. And then you've got Russia looking for influence. Wagner Group has been very active throughout many different countries in Africa. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing through all this? Like, what's the sort of the ground truth reality of how all these things are coming together, and then what that direct impact is on civilians?
Yeah. So I'll start with Russia, for instance. There's, talking to some of our leadership team in Uganda, for instance, and in Nigeria as well, there's a lot of general support for Russia. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is fueled by the fact that they're, in some shape or form, they're investing in the economy and the livelihoods of people in Africa. China obviously has a huge presence in a multitude of industries throughout Uganda, and they're the ones that are getting a lot of these contracts for infrastructure development and things like that. So all of that relates down to, for people on the ground, jobs and opportunity. And so that gives them the ability to kind of champion Russia and China and things mm-hmm. like that. There was also a huge excitement in Africa, at least in the regions that we work, for Trump's new administration coming in. Obviously, that has the perception has changed a little bit, maybe even significantly, as the international aid has changed dramatically. So, yeah.
Did the changes to USAID, that program, kind of directly impact?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was just on a call this morning with our key leaders in Uganda, and one of the things they've been saying, but noted again today, that in the Mvepi refugee settlement, which is the second smallest in across Uganda, there had been about 70 NGOs working in that particular refugee settlement. There's now less than 20. Most of them have either closed completely or scaled down dramatically because they just don't have the funding to do anything anymore.
They were primarily getting funding from USAID.
Yeah.
One thing I asked around to a few different people getting ready for this interview, sort of their thoughts on some of the influence that's happening there, because Africa, it's almost sad to frame it this way because they should be viewed through this lens of having their own agency and everything, but they are so impacted by world powers. And they have been for hundreds of years, going back to obviously the slave trade that happened in Western Africa and everything like that. But even, more recently with, you insert colonialism, and then more recently as African countries have gained their independence, their relationship with these sort of superpowers, non-colonial, but still very much a, heavily invested relationship between these countries. And I was asking, with Russia specifically, if you have the choice between working with America or Russia or America and China, why would you sort of go the Russia or China way? And the answer I got, I'm just curious, your feedback here is, Russia and China don't attach sort of moral stipulations to their money and their aid. They're just looking for influence. And so when it comes to working with sort of these local warlords and tribal leaders and things like that, they're not telling them, hey, you can't do X, Y, and Z. They're just saying, hey, as long as you're cool with us, we're not going to ask how or why. Whereas with America, we have very sort of strict rules around how we give money and everything like that. Is that what you're seeing? Is that part of it too, when you see people more sort of going the Russia route vice the America route?
Yeah, I would say that's a good kind of high level summation of it. There's obviously complexities in all of it, but I would probably concur with that idea that there's less strings attached. If you're looking at America or China investment or influence, or America versus Russia. And I think, and then there's also the history of colonialism and all of that sort of thing, and that has historically been tied more towards Europe and America, I think, in many respects. And so Russia and China, I think, have less of that historical weight on the people.
True. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of former Russian colonies in Africa,
Correct.
Former Chinese colonies, whereas France, the UK, American influence, like you can kind of throw a rock in any direction.
Yeah. We just had, last week was Independence Day in Uganda, and the week before was Independence Day in Nigeria, which obviously we're connected to because we have programs in those countries. And those are Independence Days, not from Russian influence or Chinese influence in the past. That's from European influence.
Yeah.
And so I think that does play a part in it. I'm by no means an expert on the historical impact.
And it's a complicated, there's so many things that feed into this. It's not like this is the thing.
Right.
One thing. There's never just one thing.
Right. Absolutely.